Welcome to my first installment of very scrappy tutorials. I literally use this kind of training at my professional work where I just have a very scrappy PowerPoint and go through some things that I want to teach. And today I want to teach something related to Python, but this also relates to the rest of my channel because I believe it could save you time and money. So this is really geared toward people who might be interested in coding, might want to learn more about it, and I thought I'd share a little project that I used recently. And as it's the holidays, this is something I used recently to help me with Christmas shopping or holiday shopping. So this is definitely something very scrappy. Just a little bit about my coding background. I am very much a beginner myself, and I hear the best way to learn is to teach other people. So, this is just a part of my learning as well. And what I'm going to be going through is definitely probably not the best practice on how to use Python, but I just wanted to share it from a beginner point of view to show where maybe you could get started as well if you're new to this. And so this is something that if you're a beginner, some prerequisites of this is you have some experience with either coding or Python. You're familiar with the term object oriented programming. Don't worry, this is something that completely went over my head when I was younger trying to learn coding. But once you get used to that term, this is for people who have been exposed to any type of coding, like object oriented programming. And also, this is for people who have been exposed to HTML, so they're familiar with the tagging system. But I'm going to go through all of that as well in here. But this is not like a how to start programming from scratch thing. And so, just the prerequisites. So, you want to have Python installed. There's a lot of manuals and also quick tutorials out there on how to get this installed on your computer. It's a lot easier and simpler than you would expect. And then for with Python, you want to have these libraries installed. These 4 libraries we're going to use. They're called Selenium, BS4, or Beautiful Soup is another name for it, pandas, not the furry animals, and CSV. Those are the 4 libraries that you'll want to have installed. So you could use something that like a pip installer, and there's documentation online on how to install those as well. So you just want to make sure that those are there. Visual Code Studio is going to be where we're programming in. So these are all free, by the way, to install. Visual Code Studio, and with it, you'll want to have something like Jupyter Notebook installed with it, and or something similar. Now, this can all be done like literally through a text, just notepad, and you could write all this in a notepad and run it without Visual Code Studio or Jupyter Notebook, but it will help immensely in this case. And there's documentation online on how to install that, and Chromedriver installed as well. A note about Chromedriver, um, I'm just going to go straight into that website for Chromedriver. You'll just go to the link in the description below. It's chromedriver.chromium.org/downloads, and install it for your own machine. I'm using MacBook, but you can install it for Windows. And you'll just check what Chrome version you're using. Oh, you also need Google Chrome. So install Google Chrome, check which version it is, and then download the Chromedriver. Key things about this, and should be in the documentation for how to install these as well. But once you download the Chromedriver, you want to save it somewhere like your library, where we're going to reference it in the code. And then you want to actually double click it and run it. And if you're on a MacBook, you might run into a security prompt saying that it can't be run. So you want to make sure that you enable it to run by going into your security settings, saying like allow this third-party app to run. It will run, it will open a terminal window, which you can close right away. But you just want to have that activated before we start this code. Okay, so that's the prerequisites. Now, getting into this actual code. So why am I writing this code? What is it being used for? So I definitely recognize this might be a problem only I run into a lot, but I love researching. I love comparing deals. There's a bunch of apps out there and tools that are already created that can do this for you, but I don't really like downloading a lot of apps. It could give you viruses, too many ads, and also this allows you to make it more customized when you research products. So a specific scenario that I use this tool for is I wanted to create a Christmas shopping list for my family and friends. And I was scouring the web and I found so many great objects. And then suddenly I just accumulated over 100 links of different products that I thought I wanted to buy. And I wanted to organize it in a way where I could see the pricing for everything in one view, see how much I was spending, and maybe pick and choose which ones I wanted to get or not. And so this it brought me to the idea that I know how to scrape data off the internet. So instead of clicking into each of those product links one by one, typing out each price one by one, that would take a lot of time. And maybe it will take faster for some for only 100 products, but I really didn't want to do that 100 times. So whenever I think of things that I have to do repeatedly over dozens of times, I want to see if I could create some kind of Python program to automate that for me. So, I ended up creating this program, and what it does is basically it takes a list of URLs from the same website and spits out the price for each of the products automatically and with just the click of like one button. Um, to be honest, in all honesty, it took me hours to actually write this code from the knowledge that I have because I am a beginner. And so it definitely would have been faster for me to go one by one, but it like doing these programs and creating these programs from scratch are so rewarding for me and so fun. And I know once I learn from scratch how to do those things, it will take like a few minutes to adjust it in the future, and I could use it over and over again. So this is me consolidating what I researched and learned over a couple hours into just a couple minutes for you guys, and just going through my thought process of what I created. Another scenario where this might work is it doesn't have to be for Christmas or holiday shopping. I've also used it to see the top list of movies and shows on Amazon Prime and compare them instead of clicking one by one. I could see the rating, the description, and see if I want to watch it or not. And also, this could be used for if your cousin Jill gives you a huge list of her Christmas list and she just gives you the URL links for everything she wants. and you want to see what the total cost of that is, you can use this code to quickly parse through all those links, have a robot, basically Python, go click into all those links, gather the price out, and spit it out into a nice, easy table for you to read. So that's kind of the use case I am going to use this code for. Without further ado, we're going to get out of this really scrappy PowerPoint. Finding that tree was an effort, by the way. Like that was finding that tree was took more time than the whole presentation. But we'll go in. So the use case we're starting out with is we're going to use this site called uncommongoods.com, and this was an actual real case where I just loved so many items from this site. I've never heard of it before. This is not sponsored, but I just loved so many items that I ended up just kind of bookmarking all of the links. And yes, I know you could just add them to your wish list or your cart and just like see all the prices at once that way. But I want to do it my way. I want to do it the Python way. Um, just a word of warning. Some sites don't like when you do this type of script, like type of scraping the data. So you just want to watch out for that. But this seemed to be doable for me. So, the scenario, you're going through the site, you see a bunch of items, you just bookmark a bunch of links, and then this is what the site looks like. So, for example, you go into um, one actual product page and it has all this information, and there's things you want to gather, there's data you want to gather from the actual product page that you want to automate. So in this case, I wanted to gather price. This code also allows you to gather really anything you see here. So if you wanted to see what rating they had or the description to see in one view, you could basically pull that out as well. So our goal here is to have the program go into the URL, open up the page, and then find out of this whole page that I'm highlighting here the price. And though it's gonna find the price, and it's not gonna be perfect, but as I'll show you at the end product, but it's gonna find the price and then spit it out into a table, so it will have like hundreds of other items with the price. And so that is our goal. And so how are we gonna do this? Before we get into the code, there's some things about this that will make this possible, and we'll have to gather some tagging. So actually, we're gonna just jump into before we get into code, and I'm gonna show you kind of what my actual data looks like. And so if you have projects working with data, this might seem really familiar with to you. But let's say I have my list of URLs. I went shopping, or I got a list from my cousin Jill, and she sent me all of the URLs of the products she's interested in, and I have 74 here. And so this isn't an Excel program, but it could be a text file. This one I actually saved as a CSV file, which is a comma delimited file. That's basically just like a raw data file without any formatting. And so this is what the data looks like. And we want to go into each one of these URLs and pick out the price. Okay, so we have this data file. It's called uncommon URLs. And so that's like the items we have, right? So the items is like we have our URL, we want to parse through it. Okay, let's get into the code. So I'm not gonna, I am not gonna type out the code word for word. That I don't have time for that. And realistically, you're gonna get code, and especially starting out as a beginner, you're gonna gather your code that already exists from other web pages. Google is your friend. Google will take you to Stack Overflow. StackOverflow.com is the a really reliable source to pretty much search how to find this code. Um, but uh, so we once we have the code, we can go into our program. So this view is Visual Studio Code. I have opened it in a brand new, just blank folder that I named Xmas List Scrape tutorial. It has nothing in it currently. And so when you go to Studio Code, you could click open folder, and just that would be kind of like your workspace, or just your folder that has all the files related to this. So right now it's blank, and a lot of times it will look something similar to this, where it has like a get started tab, and you could start a new file, you could open existing file, you could do some cloning with Git and repository. To be honest, I'm still learning about that. So we won't get into that now. Um, this From here, you want to create a new Python file, and I recommend creating a Jupyter Notebook type Python file. And basically, what Jupyter Notebook allows you to do is it basically can break apart a Python file, and it's easier to run and test different sections, so you don't have to run the whole file all at the same time. And so I like to use it when I'm kind of just testing a new code. And so there's a shortcut, a keyboard shortcut in Visual Code Studio, and there's documentation about this. I recommend going through the getting started documentation stuff, but there's code on the Mac. If you hold down Window Shift P, this will allow you to open brand new files specifically for a coding language. And so right at the top, I have create new Jupyter Notebook, and that's what we want. And so I've already set up my Visual Code to have that option show up. If that option does not show up for you, then you'll need to have it set up. And there's instructions to follow online for this. Some other things that I set up my Visual Code Studio for, on the bottom right, you could see some of my settings. I have something called Prettier set up. This is basically to make the code like more readable colors and organization, so that it's just easier to follow. You don't need any of this stuff, but it just helps me as a beginner. You really could just write this literally from a notepad text file, and run it through your terminal, and it should run the same too. So that, this is definitely just more for aid to help with reading code. And so here is like a box that shows up, and this is kind of what I call a section where it has a play button on the left, and if you hover over it, says execute cell. You can just execute that particular section, and then you can add, if you press this plus code, you could add multiple sections. Markdown is basically adding a place where you can type out notes, and it won't run. As you could see, this is a markdown. It doesn't have a play button, but this up here is a code. It has a play button. So markdown is just basically notes. But you could also do notes as in comments with hashtags or pound signs, which is a Python commenting. So anything with pound sign won't run. So these are just different sections, and you could run them one at a time. But I'm gonna start with one first and I'm just gonna delete these. So let's go ahead and delete these. So I have provided all of this code in the description below as well. I provided it in a Google Docs folder for you to view, and you can copy from that file directly into here, and you'll see that it has all the same sections. So the first section we're going to copy and paste in. I like to start with just having all the libraries inputted and loaded in the beginning. So from the prerequisites, we have Selenium, PS4, Pandas, and CSV. Um, there is uh, there are different ways to kind of import the libraries. So if it's something that says from, that means you just are importing a subset of that library. So each library has these functions, and I'm probably getting the wording wrong, but just subsets in them where it allows you to run different functions in that library. So sometimes you don't have to import the entire library if you want it to run faster or save space. You can do just a subset of it. So for the first one, we're doing from Selenium, import WebDriver. So Selenium is the library, and we're just importing the WebDriver part. Selenium, there's documentation on this, but basically that will help us open up a web browser and go into and do actions within a web browser. So it will allow Python, the program, to go in a web browser for us. So it has a WebDriver, and then you can also hover over it and see more information with Visual Code Studio. You can't do that in just Notepad, so that's also nice. The second one, from BS4, import Beautiful Soup. Beautiful Soup is our scraper or web scraper. It goes into HTML code into a web page. So it works with Selenium and WebDriver, and it looks for those tags. So we want to find that price tag. We're going to look for that tag in there. And you could hover over Beautiful Soup. It's a very popular library, and it parses through HTML, XML documents, any internet web page documents, and has more information there. Pandas, very popular. So pandas is, I don't know why it's called pandas, but it is popular for data structure and data parsing. So we're renaming it PD. That's optional, but sometimes, but since I copy and paste this from Google, that's very common. So sometimes instead of writing out all of pandas and you want to write it, you have to reference it again, you could just put it as PD. So the as is just renaming it basically. And so pandas is creating those data tables. So we want to bring those prices into a new table. So pandas will help with that. CSV. So import CSV will read my CSV file. And so you might need a different one if you're using an Excel file or text file. So I do recommend if you have your data and your list of URLs to save it as CSV. And you could do that by copy and pasting data into Excel, saving it as a CSV. That's pretty standard. You probably already know that if you're at this stage. So import CSV allows you to read CSV files. So our next section, and then we could go ahead. The beauty of this is that we could run it and then move on to the next section and then run it section by section. So, and then what this does as you're coding is that it allows you to debug and troubleshoot as you go. So you don't have to wait to write out everything. And if you get an error at one point, it will just error out at that section and you could stop there and go back. So what I usually like to do when I code is like I do a section and then I run it, just making sure that it is good to go. And for my environment on Visual Code Studio, when I run it, it will ask me to choose like one of these environments, and you might have one, you might have all three of these like me. And I sometimes I forget which one, and so I will choose one, and it'll give me an error, and then I'll go back and choose the other one if it doesn't work. But I think this one, I learned that like anything that has global environment on the right works for me, I think. Um, and it might ask to install like the Python, and then you can install it, it won't hurt. So actually that one didn't work. So sometimes you run into errors like that. There's no pip installer available for this environment. And so there's ways to fix that, I know, but I'm going to actually, oh, cancel out of that. I'm gonna actually change it again. So change it to another thing. So if I do that and run it again, I'll click change kernel. So those are called kernels, and try the next one and see if it works. And so the next one did. So usually you only have to do that the first time you open up this file. So as you can see, it's saved as an IPYNB file, and that's for Jupyter Notebook Python. And so once you open up this file, uh, and run it once, you just choose one and you're good. And let's go ahead and save. So that ran fine. It has a checkbox and shows how long it took. And so let's go ahead and save this. So I'm gonna do my Command S and then save it into, so I have these other files here, but I'm gonna save it into my tutorial folder and name it Xmas list. Xmas list prices. And so now we can see on the left side, it's showing under our folder that we opened. And just to give you more of just visibility, oops, wrong one, more visibility into where it's being saved, it will show up in your folder Pathfinder thing if it shows up. I don't know why it's like that, but yeah, so that's the folder in your documents or wherever you saved it. So it shows up there now. So I recommend keeping that folder open because we're actually going to use that folder to bring in our CSV data in a bit as well. But before we do that, we have to set up the rest of our code. So that section is good to go, and sometimes might need to run it again. And sometimes there is like a survey pop-up, you could exit out of that and just make sure it has the checkbox. And then we're gonna make another section of code. And so now the top section is already ran, we don't have to run it again. And then for this, we're going to create some empty lists and empty some lists and choose some variables. So the list we want to create is going to eventually be what we save our data into columns in the table as. So I have next in my code these three lists. So these three empty lists, the linked lists, we're going to use that to ingest the URLs from the CSV file, and then we're going to also spit it out into the data table. The product, we also want the name of the product as well. So I forgot to mention, along with the price, we're gonna grab out the name of the product. And then for price, that's where we're gonna store our prices to spit out in the table. So these are, you could think of these as table columns. You could use them for a lot of different things, but in this case, they're pretty much gonna equal our table columns. So that will just have those variables set there, and then these brackets will show that it is a list. And so the next part is define CSS variables. And I'm going to show you how I got these variables. So these CSS variables, I probably should have renamed it. I don't know. Is it called CSS? It's probably HTML variables, but HTML variables. And this is, again, just the comments here. I like to describe the steps I'm doing, and so it's good for my own learning as well. So I like to comment on what's happening. So these are just variables at this time right now. They don't do anything yet, but we're gonna use these with the beautiful soup library to find where in the web page we could find the product name and the price name. So we're looking for, we're just going to name a product class, name it price class, and we're looking for these tags. And so let's see, I think um, this is going to make more sense later, but it might be a little bit confusing now. But this is where the HTML tagging info comes in. So basically, going back to the web page, we want to find in every single one of those links, what is the name? And so for this example, we're going with your name in a snowflake. Is what we're looking for, and what is the price. And with HTML, if you're familiar with it, you should know that every single similar page has the same back end HTML tag that inputs this data, and it should be the same name, the same HTML code name. So what that means is that it also needs to you need to make sure you're on a product page. So some things to look out for. The URL. The URL of all of these is like under this subdivision, subfolder product. And so if you were to go to another page that doesn't have this, it might be different. So you just want to make sure that all the URLs are similarly set up like this. Similarly set up in this way, and it's easier to do when it's cleaner like this. So for instance, going back to really quickly to our data, our input data, we have all the URLs the same way: uncommongoods.com/product/ and then the name of the product. Some websites will have like codes instead of like full names in there, but we that's like one thing we want to look out for in the web page. The second thing we want to look out for is now we're going to search for the actual code. And so in your Google Chrome browser, you're going to press F12 inside the browser window. This is going to open up developer tools, and this is where we're going to find the back end HTML tags that we're going to instruct Python to look for and then spit out whatever is associated with that tag. So first thing we're going to start off with is the title. And so there's this mouse clicker button on the top left. You'll see my mouse is circling it. You're going to click that, and this will allow you to search for HTML elements. So as you can see, things are highlighting, and then there's a little box that pops up that has more coding. So it shows like CSS elements and also HTML stuff. So, and then, so we're gonna highlight the name as close as possible, and you'll see that at the very top it says h1.h2. And then if we click that, we'll see the actual HTML code here. And each one we'll see in the code, we'll see your name in the snowflake shows up in the text, and then that matches that. And the HTML class is actually H1. How do we know that? A lot of times, it will have class after the name. So H1 class. Also, H1 is very common to have as like the main title of a product web page. So this one is a very simplified website. H1 is a simple code class that we could take out. Some websites, like Amazon Prime Video, for instance, don't have like different names. They don't use H1. Well, they use H1, but there's a lot of other subclasses under there. So you might need the class and a subclass, but that's kind of a little bit more advanced. I'll go through a little bit of an example of how to code for a subclass as well, in case you need to find the subclass. But for a class, you could find it here, H1. And so you could find it by doing that click thing, or you could even search. So once you're in here and like click into it and you open up this code on the right, you could even do control or command find, and it will pop up this find by string or selector. And you could start typing in the text that you're looking for. In a snowflake. And you could try to see where it's showing up. And so but this can get a little bit confusing, to be honest, as well, because it shows up 14 times. And because there's like places where it shows up in, if you hover over the image, it will pop up the name. But that's one way you could find it as well. But usually I just do like a click inside and try to get that H1. So it's most likely going to be H1 or H1 in a subclass. And so we'll take that H1 and it's basically gonna be, yeah, just H1 basically. And we'll go back to the code, and we're just gonna put H1 in the product class. And this is where sometimes you have to troubleshoot whether it works or not and test around. And sometimes you want to run the code and test out different classes and pick and choose and see which one works and which one doesn't. But I tested out a few, and H1 definitely works. Now, the next thing that's going to be harder to find is the price. So we created a price class here. You can name it anything. And I found that the tag was at price. And I'll just demonstrate how I found that as well. So going back here, we have our developer tools. We can click the mouse again on the top left and then hover over the price 35. And so this one was a little bit more tricky to find because there's so many places where it does show up. And so the key thing about this is that this was where I actually had to go back and forth. And at first I was trying to test span, but there were so many spans. I tried span with the subclass item price. That didn't work. And then finally I just went above and just tested out like the hierarchy above. So what about span price? And then I eventually went to app price, and that seemed to work. So this was a lot testing around, but I found out that the class was at price, and I'm sure there is a much easier way to do this, or people who might be more advanced with HTML might have found that in a quick second. versus me struggling kind of blindly, feeling my way around. But that this is a way it's kind of been working for me for now. And so I was able to find that, okay, app price is the class that we want to use. So I tested that in and it spit out the data that I wanted as well. And so we're going to move on to the rest of the code, and I'll give an example of testing and debugging different classes to see if they work. So we're gonna I'm gonna show you one more variable before we move into the actual functions and coding, um, automation code. So the last variable, which is actually kind of optional, is to set a URL, like just a base URL that the WebDriver, Selenium WebDriver will open Chrome up in. This is definitely optional. I don't know, well, actually I haven't really tested much without this, but this is just so you know that the WebDriver is working and is able to interact with a web page and bring up web pages. So for this, I'm just using the main uncommon goods URL, just giving it a variable of uncommon URLs. So we're gonna be using that once to open up the web page, and then we'll be using these variables all throughout the rest of the code. Okay, next section I am copying and pasting in is, so I actually should be creating a brand new section. So we'll run this. Of course, it's gonna run usually because it's just making variables at this time. So we ran it, it's fine. We'll put in a new code. And so we'll do the next section here, and this is our actual web scraping kind of automation, a little bit, but we're web scraping function that we're going to automate and iterate over every single one of the URLs. So what does that mean? We're defining our function here. We're going to name it scrap text, which we're going to call to put in our list. So LST, I just put it in as any variable. I just named it LST for list. We're going to input our product and price list later. And then we're going to use the class type. So we're going to do the product class and price class to find that data, put it into the list, and yeah, find that data from the class. So find class is the variable I'm using, and I'm going to start calling out the different functions from the BS4 Beautiful Soup library. So soup, find all, class type. So this calls to work with the open WebDriver. And so this shows like in the current website that it's in, we're going to interact with the web page and find in the whole web page, and then we're putting if the length of find class equals 0, put unknown. So this helps fill in data that can't be found. So if we can't find it, we'll just like fill it in. Instead of blank, we'll put unknown, so we know that it's like working, because sometimes when it's blank we don't know what the issue is. So I like to put some type of variable like unknown in the data. Else for n in find class, append, we're gonna append the what we found. And so this is actually, yeah, Yeah, so this soup is actually, looking back at my code, it actually is a variable that I created for the beautiful soup um, variable. So this will call and iterate that I'll show later. So this is also something that I got help from Stack Overflow and in Google searching, but this kind of sets up how we're going to find our class type with the beautiful soup, and then we're going to add in what we find, append it to the end of whatever list we're looking at. So whether it's a price list or the product list. And so that is our function to find and add and connect the dots with these variables. So to kind of activate the function, we're going to run this, and it's not going to do anything right now. It's just going to kind of create it. So now it's created. Now it can be called. So it was able to be created, no errors. And we're going to move on to the next code. And this is where we're going to actually start doing our data and having some action done. So next thing we're going to copy is the the driver lines. So these two lines, the driver, I'm giving it a variable. This first line doesn't do anything yet. It just creates that driver variable where it sets the WebDriver um, to the Chromedriver that we installed. And so you want to make sure you reference to where you saved and ran your Chromedriver. So it's usually recommended to save it in this location if you're on a Mac, use your local bin. But really you could save it anywhere and just make sure wherever you installed that Chromedriver, this is where you reference it. And the second line is where we actually start doing some action to open a web page. So this driver get, this is from Selenium. This get uncommon URLs, it's going to open this variable, uncommon URLs at the top. And so once we run this, you'll see that it will open a brand new web page automatically. You'll notice a few funny things about this web page. It doesn't have any of your saved extensions or browser bookmarks. It is, as it says, Chrome is being controlled by automated test software. So that's what you want to see. And as you can see, it opened up the main Uncommon Goods web page that we set it to. Important things about this. You do not want to close this window. You do not want to touch it while the rest of the code is running. So this opened up by itself. Keep it open. You can minimize it, but I recommend having it open to monitor as well. And this is where you'll start seeing some cool things where the robotics or the AI and automation will be put to work and you'll see it in front of your very eyes. And I think it's really cool because I kind of just sit back and do nothing. And I have this computer program doing all my work for me, which is pretty awesome. So we have this open. I also like to just remind myself of those instructions. So I go back to the code um, and just make these comments. So at the top. And so I am going to do a split screen here and we can see this code in action. So we're putting the newly opened Chrome browser on the right, and then our Python code will be on the left. So we'll see it in real time how the web page changes as we run the code. So you see how this is helpful where it's like section by section, you could check your work and how you're doing. And now Next is we want to, I did put in some checks here, but we'll get into that later. The next thing we want to do is actually read our CSV file. So we'll do another code section here. And this CSV reading code is very common. You could find it in like the first link of Google results when Googling like open or read CSV file into Python. And this code will be like one of the first that will pop up. And basically the things that you will change for yourself is this is from the CSV library, so you'll change the name of your file. I have my file name as uncommonurls.csv. I'm able, so a quick note, if your file is not in the same folder as this Python file, you have to list out the full file location here. But because it makes it easier for myself, I want to put my data file in the same folder so I could just reference it as just the file name. So make sure you put your CSV file in the same folder. So I'm going to do that now. And then I'm going to save it as file, save as, make sure it's saved in there, and it's going to save as a CSV file. And now I will check my window, and now uncommon urls.csv is in the same folder. As you can see, you could click it, you could view the contents, and it's there. And so this is the same file name that works. Some things, there's more information about like what R encoding means. And so I'm naming it as data for row and CSV files. So this is all pretty like copy and paste from Stack Overflow. And just leave it at that. And you're going to, so you're gonna also put in your link list and append all those URLs to the link list that we, as you remember, created at the top, link list. And the great thing about this is like you highlight it, you can see where link is all referenced. So we have that set to append to the row, to the list. And so we'll go ahead and run that, make sure it runs okay. It was able to run perfectly, and we're gonna check it now. So I said I had some checks in here. I'm going to go ahead and make a new line that has print length of the link list. So len is the length. We just want to make sure it actually has data now. So you run this, and 74, that should match the total URLs in the CSV file. And if this says 0, then that means it didn't print. If you didn't run this and you went ahead and ran this print length link and you didn't append anything, it should show 0 because, as you know, we put link at the front. So just to give you an idea of well, yeah, I think this will be good. I hope this won't be confusing for people, but I like to double check like how the different code interacts with other code and just make sure this is the way I learn. So sometimes I want to see like how I could change that that number, the length of the link. So I could even go back to the top and restart the list, right? So if I were to go back to the top and run the second code that creates all the empty variables, if I run that, that will reset the list, and that will make it go back to 0. So if I run that really quick, this is just demonstration. If I go back all the way to the bottom, this should now show 0. So why did that happen? It's because I reran this particular section, which has this particular line of code, which sets the link back to an empty list, back to an empty, just zero list. So that's why it shows 0 now. But this code up above fills up that list with the URL. So if I run that one again and then run the test, now it's 74. So I hope that makes sense for people. That's kind of the way that I learn when I try to follow tutorials myself. I try to see where I could break it and where I can fix it myself again, putting in different variables. So I encourage you guys also, as you go through this tutorial, that you even test making your own, changing some of my code to make it your own and see how it affects the code just one by one, like changing the name of one of these variables, changing the URL, changing different things, that just seeing how it works for you and how your different actions will affect the code versus what I did. And that's how I found it easier for myself to learn for as a beginner. So that's just me and how I learn. Might work for you, might not, but just a little learning tip, study tip for that. So, okay, we did the check. We are at this place where you have the number 74. That's what we're looking for. And next, we can now start moving on to the actual iteration or loop or for loop or automation of the actual function. So this is the code we're gonna do is call the actual scrape, it should say scrap, or it should say scrape, but we'll just leave it as scrap text for now. We're gonna call this scrap text function and actually put it to work. So we're gonna create a new code break, and here I'm gonna put in this for loop that I created. And so this one, I'll go through line by line. For I in range 0 length list. So there's a couple little functions within functions here. So for loops, it calls this variable. It could be called I, it could be called banana. You can name it anything, but we use I, or some people use N or A. You'll see commonly just to reference in the rest of this code. So if you highlight it, you'll see I there and it will be referenced. In the range, so this is basically a range that counts how many times this for loop will run. So 0, and then this second part after the comma will be another numeric output. So you could put 0 to 5, and it will run 5 times, or actually 0 to 5. It will run 6 times because 0 is the starting point as the first time. 0 is always the first run, and then each run after that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are next run. So 0 to 5 will be 6 runs. But here I put length of link. So length of the link list that we created. So it will automatically print out the length of the list. That's why up here we want to check how many times this will run. 74 times. So this will automatically run 74 times, or however long the list is. I put the note control for performance because this can get a little bit hefty on your computer usage. If you find that you have to iterate over lists that's 500 rows long, or even 1,000 or more times long, it can take a long time to go through all of those one by one. So I put control for performance. So if you want to test this, instead of running the whole 74 list, you can put 5 and just test the first 5. You could put 1 and test the first 2. So that's what the range means. And it will run whatever you're telling it to do within the indent underneath that many times. And then for that will be like basically that will reference the number of times it runs. So the first iteration, that I, wherever you reference that I, it will output the numeric number 0. So the first time it runs, it will output 0. The second time it runs, it will output 1. That is really helpful in referencing. This is where the for loops are really powerful in referencing what input you want to go, or if you want it to iterate over a list. So going line by line, the only place that we use that I is the first line. Driver, get link I. Remember that we use driver get above, and this to open the web page up in the box 4. So we used it first to get the web page. So we know that we can use that again to reference another web page. And so okay, at this point, we got our list of URLs. How do we go line by line through those URLs? So we go line by line by putting it into a list. And to reference the list, to reference a row in the list, you can reference it by putting like whatever numeric row it is. So I hope this makes sense. This is I know this is like for lists and loops 101 and probably very, very basic knowledge for a lot of coders out there, but this is something that I think just kind of went over my own head for a while. So the for loop, the I is like what number of times it's already run. And then that I in the link, it's going to go down like link row 0, link row 1, and then link row 3. Each time it runs, it will reference, get that link in that row, get that link in that row, get that link in that next row. So then hopefully that makes sense. So what that will do is you'll see on the right, the web page, the test software web page that we have open, it will start showing the URLs one by one for each row in your list. Pretty cool, right? So next, we're creating the content page source, and we're going to go through the beautiful soup content parser. So I just created the content variable. It's going to be driver page source. So we want to view in that driver whatever page we're on. We're going to view the page source, which has all the HTML code that we looked at when we pressed F12 in the Google Chrome web page earlier. And then we have soup, beautiful soup content, and beautiful soup is where it's gonna be able to read that content in the driver, and this will help us go through iterating over. It connects to the soup up here to find all that classes and to connect it, finally to connect this whole thing to that function. We will call that function scrap text, and for every tag we want. So product class, price class. Now this might seem simple we're just finding 2 things, but this is super helpful if you want to find so many other things in the web page, like the reviews, others. So you don't have, and so basically what this does is this is copying this entire thing under the define, and it is just, instead of writing it out 2 times like this and then putting like product class, and then putting like product list, and then putting another one, price class, and price list. And then what if you have more data points you want to find? Then it will just be this whole huge box for everything. And so that's where the function comes in, and that's how that works. So that's kind of like Python, a little bit of Python 101, but I hope this makes sense in the context of the use case we're using. So instead of that whole big thing, we're doing script text, just like that one simple word, and then putting in the variables that way. There might be even more ways to make this more efficient and automated, but this is kind of like in simple terms, getting started. This is what I've been doing. So now, this is where we get to see the R program in action and see if it actually works. And crossing our fingers, when we run this, we'll start to see it run. So clicking on the execute cell, and now we could see it in action on the right. It's going through all of those links, all of those URLs that we have in that CSV file. We put it into the list, and it's iterating over every row up to 74 times, or however long the list is. And so what this is doing, it is taking just 1 second per page to gather the title and the price from each of the product pages. And I'm not doing anything. My hands are completely just free, and it's automating over. And this is the power of Python and coding web scraping in action. Okay, so now that it's done, it took about a minute and a half to go through 70 or so links, and that would have definitely taken at least a half an hour to go through myself manually to gather all that data. And so what happened now after that's all done? Now we could see that if the different lists are populated. So we're going to do another test code block, and we're going to print not only the link that should be the same, 74, but we're going to make sure the product list and the price list are populated, and also we want to make sure they're the same size all together. And so we run it, and ta-da! If you see the same 3 numbers, it's a lottery. It is correct, it worked, and you're ready to move on to the next step. If you don't see the same numbers, you want to stop here because you will get an error in the next step. You won't be able to create your data frame tables and spit it out into a CSV file because you need to have all the columns the same size or the same number of rows. So in this case, everything's 74, and we're able to move forward. So that's another check. The very last step in this code is to actually print out the data that we just gathered. And so how do we want to do that? There's a couple ways we could do that. So let's make a new code block. And we're gonna copy in that last section of code. And also, I just want to make sure I put in any comments along the way. And quick tip, you can also comment out things if you want to debug or different sections of the code by doing command / I think that's a /, and then it will automatically comment out instead of just typing in hashtag. And so I'm just putting in some comments here. Make sure that I know what I did and why I did it. And so, okay, going back to the last set of code, we're going to go line by line. we're setting a variable called a. You could name it anything, but this variable is, I think, like you would call it a dictionary or keys in coding in Python. And it's different from a list because it's basically a list of pairs and it's in curly brackets. And there's more documentation about this and uses for it, but it's great when you want to just pair up different things. And the things we're pairing here is a column name and column data. So you could start seeing the the table output that we're wanting to create eventually here. So we're going to create the name in quotes and to show it as a string or text called URL, and we're going to assign it to the linked list. And then product, we're going to assign to the product list. Price, we're going to assign it to the price list. And so the next line is another variable. DFA, I just named it DF for data frame A. You can name it anything, equal to PD dot data frame A. PD is from the pandas library, and data frame, it just basically creates a table that you can input all those different lists and columns. So before they were all separated, now we're combining them together, and this is why they need to be the same size. And we are assigning them with our key or dictionary that we created A. And so now we have it in a table, but it's still not exported outside of Python. It's still like stuck in Python. So what if we want to share this list? What if we want to read it in an easy way? We at this point, we want to actually export it out to a file. In this case, we're going to export it out to another CSV file. But in this new CSV file, we're going to have the product name and price. So we're gonna do DFA, which is a data frame, to CSV, which is a function to export out to a CSV file. We're gonna give it a name. We can name it anything, but it just has to end in .csv. So we're gonna name it uncommon prices. And these other things, copy and paste from Stack Overflow. We'll give you the info for that. And so we have that. And if all is successful, because we didn't give this a path, it should save to the same folder and it should work. So we'll click run, and as you can see on the left, a new file popped up. You can click it in here in VS Code, and you'll see the data is here, but it's horrible to read tables here in VS Code. So I recommend finding the file in your actual folder drive, and then when you open it, ta-da! Here we are. As you can see, it's not perfect. There are some unknowns, but it definitely helped gather the majority of the data, which is what we want, and saves us so much time. And so here you'll see we have our prices, some price ranges that we might need to format a bit more, but that's okay. And we have our data. So this was just a very simplified example. This will definitely help with much bigger data, bigger data sets, and just also if you want to find more elements as well. And there's a lot of things you can do here. You could even use pandas and other tools in Python to create graphs and charts of this. Like you could sort it by like price and category and all this stuff. There's so many different options you could do, but this is just to get started with this code, and I hope you have fun coding, and definitely let me know if you have any questions here to learn as well, or if you have any suggestions, if there might be like better ways to do this as well. Would love to to help out in sharing my learning journey with this and my thoughts. So if you have made it this far, thank you so much for watching. And if I get a lot of interest in these kind of videos, I'll probably do more. And I have a couple projects that I like to test on as well. So just let me know your thoughts, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks.